To go? Okay, we're live. So hello everyone, I'm Erica Gutsick-Gibbon, and I'm here today with Sal. Now, you might know Sal. Some of you guys might be familiar with Sal and what Sal gets up to. And if you do know Sal, you probably know that we do indeed have some very different opinions on a lot of different things. But the cool thing about science is that we can come together. Oh, shoot. We're live. Now I'm in the background. Okay, that's going to be awkward for everyone. Sorry, dudes. But the cool thing about science is what I was actually saying is that we're capable of coming together and exchanging methodologies, even if we don't agree from a worldview standpoint or even on conclusions. And that's the beautiful thing about exchanging methods and kind of the process. So today we're talking about phylogeny. Now I'm going to let Sal introduce himself. So Sal, please take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and we'll jump into our activities for today.
If I could show my PowerPoint, because I have some shameless self-promotion.
Hey, we love shilling around here.
So let me, thank you. So Erica and I go a ways back. And for some of you that don't know the story, we met on Reddit. And I was always perplexed. I said, Gutsick-Gibbon. I was talking to my friends. I said, never met any dude like this, I just don't know what's going on. I just can't put my finger on it, but this dude ain't like anyone I met. And then sometime thereafter, I see it's like, oh my goodness, that's why.
Yes, I pulled the veil back. I am but a bespectacled lady.
So I'm a Christian creationist. I used to, I was a professing Christian pretty much my whole life, but I learned evolution in elementary school, and I just over time had change of thoughts. And my YouTube channel now has a nice mnemonic that you can use to get to it. It's Evidence and Reasons. It doesn't matter what the capitalization is. And then I also have the sister website, which isn't built up yet, evidenceandreasons.org. And you can get from one to the other by going there. I've been tentatively scheduled this Friday, December 18th, on Modern Day Debate. I haven't gotten confirmation yet. My life story was told in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. That wasn't a scientific article. That was just kind of a miracle that my Christian testimony and my work with intelligent design was featured there. And so why am I here today? I feel that creationists, especially the science students who go off to college, need to be equipped with the truth. And there's some things that creationists say that they teach their young, like say the second law of thermodynamics precludes evolution, or they'll say phylogeny, these nested hierarchies don't exist. And when these students go off to school and they start to actually study these topics, they're going to feel like they've been lied to. And so this is my opportunity to help set the record straight. So yes, this does cause a complication, what we're going to study tonight. It did for me, but I would rather people be told just the facts and told the truth. And if it causes them complication, they're going to have to deal with it. It's much better than to tell them something that's kind of a cheap argument that's actually not true. It might make them believe in creationism for a little bit, but if they go off to science school, they're going to find out differently. And this afternoon, I had a little discussion about who should be our biology professor. What would a creationist prefer? Dr. Dan Kent Hovind or P.Z. Myers? When my boss, who's a creationist, John Sanford, sent me off to school, he sent me to the NIH, where it's not a creationist institution. He sent me to the NIH, not Dinosaur Adventureland. So I would pick Erica to also be a biology teacher to creationist students. I would feel much more comfortable with that. And I know that may sound insulting, but I just told you, my boss didn't send me to Dinosaur Adventureland. He sent me to the NIH to learn under people like Erica, and I'd have students, just fellow students like her. So
it is highest praise to be placed even on the same playing field as Dinosaur Adventureland. So I very much appreciate that, Sal.
So I feel privileged to be making this joint presentation with you. I may talk a little bit from the creationist perspective, but a lot of this is just going to be pure science. So thank you. And I'd like to thank Erica for letting me do a rebroadcast of this to my channel. And so people that are watching this on my channel as a rebroadcast, thank you for joining me.
Oh, please. It's the pleasure is all ours, honestly. And we're glad to have you here, Sal. So I'm going to share the screen because interestingly enough, I got a lot of folks when this kind of came up this afternoon who said, okay, what's phylogeny? And I was thinking to myself, all right, you know, I am a channel that covers a lot of evolutionary biology and things of that nature. But I think that when people are kind of go up to bat with the concept of phylogeny, and they don't really get what it is in to the degree that I think would be good for application and just for general, you know, understanding. So we're going to start with a little tiny itty bitty PowerPoint, a la the ones that I used to do on Modern Day Debate, just to kind of frame what it is that phylogeny is. So here's our little PowerPoint, and we'll hop right into it. So Sal and I, like he said, we're definitely coming at this from different angles, right? I'm a pretty staunch, you know, evolution person who, you know, loves, you know, human evo and all anthropology and all those kind of fields. And the cool thing about phylogeny is that it's so applicable to so many different fields and in its scope that you don't need by any kind of conventional science or worldview to use it. So it's good to how to use regardless. Now, I come from RStudio. I'm an R person, which is like a statistical software, and not everyone who encounters R loves R. That's okay. I'm going to provide the code for what we're doing today in the comments so that you can go and do this for yourself if you'd like, because what we're going to do is we're going to run some phylogenetic trees. Now, the question is, first, okay, what's phylogenetics? Well, phylogenetics is a scientific study of phylogeny. Phylogeny pertains to the evolutionary history of a taxonomic group of organisms. So put simply, it's concerned with the relationships of one organism to another according to evolutionary similarities and differences. This could be molecular or morphologic or biogeographic. I suspect where Sal and I will differ here is essentially how far evolution or change over time can kind of take those differences, you know, whether or not it's going to be constrained to a family, you know, or order level, and whether or not that kind of pertains to common ancestry. Now, I'm not really discussing common ancestry at all today. I'm going to be working within some very, very particular orders and clades. So why does phylogeny matter? Because I hear a lot from sometimes creationists, but also like people who are in different areas of STEM fields who are like, phylogeny, who cares about that? Why does it matter? In the case of humans, from my perspective, phylogeny can help us learn more about our evolutionary history, which has some enormous implications for medicine, pathology, and the development of pharmaceuticals by studying model organisms. So we learn a lot by looking at rhesus macaques and chimpanzees. But for non-primates, phylogeny can be vital in determining conservation strategies for endangered species, combating disease in the cases of bacteria, and informing other areas of bioinformatics with novel algorithms. So you don't have to, you know, be down with evolution to utilize phylogenetics. And if you are down with evolution, boy howdy, can you use it for a lot. So how exactly does phylogeny work? Oftentimes, phylogenetic work is presented as a phylogenetic tree, which is going to be kind of what I'm looking at today in RStudio. And these trees tend to be constructed using DNA or RNA sequences, or sometimes even whole genomes. It really does depend, though. So what we're looking at down here is the primate F2. It's like a homeobox gene that's X-linked. But you can also do it whole genome-wise. So because I'm in the field of primatology, I do indeed study primates. And the cool thing about primates is because humans like studying things that are close to us, we've sequenced more primate genomes as far as mammals go than pretty much any other order. So we've got, you know, this is actually an outdated list, interestingly enough here, but we can compare all of the different gene families for, you know, the 7 primate species rather that we're looking at here. And of course, there are more being added to the list all the time as sequencing becomes cheaper. So I think that that's pretty cool and interesting. You can also use phylogenetics for phylogenetic corrections, which is really, really important if you're interested in doing something like biostatistics, because phylogenetics can skew your results. If you're looking at a bunch of closely related organisms, sometimes the effect that you're seeing, if you're trying to measure, say, in a video earlier today, I was discussing, let's say I'm looking at a troop of rhesus macaques, and I want to see how a monkey's age influences its rank in the troop. Well, phylogeny can actually impact that, because if these rhesus macaques descend from a more ancient macaque group that kind of has an inertia in one way or another, that's going to mean that I'm getting false positives or false slopes in one way or another. So because of this, it's good practice to include what's called a phylogenetic correction in whatever model you're doing. Now, I'm working on my thesis right now, and just finished my stats yesterday, actually, and got them okayed by my advisor this morning. And I had to do a phylogenetic correction, and that's why I want to share with you how to do it, because I think that it was really annoying to figure out, and I think everyone could benefit from just having it in the back of your head that, how to do these kinds of things. Phylogenetic corrections also account for potential impacts of phylogeny based off of the fact that you're looking at non-independent samples, that being the species, and you can basically just get these more robust results. Now, I use a statistical software called RStudio, and so I import a lot of my consensus or block trees into that program to perform these phylogenetic corrections. So what we're doing today is we're going to be going to 10K trees on my end, and we're going to be pulling some consensus trees from the order Perissodactyla, order primates or primates, and the order carnivora, as well as the clade of, God, I always mess up how to pronounce this. I always say cetartiodactyla, but it's actually just cetartiodactyla, which is going to be your even-toed ungulates as well as cetaceans. And here are my sources if you want them. I've just coming off of this master's program, so I've got like source methodology beaten into my head. So if you want to see the sources, there they are. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be doing, at least on my end. But the real question is going to be, hold on, stop screen share. The real question is going to be, first, what's Sal going to get up to? Because Sal's taking the more molecular approach, and I'm looking more at the large-scale species. So, Sal, I'm going to toss it to you. You're going to hit it off first. Show us what's up. Show us how to align sequences, and then I'm going to take everyone through the arduous journey that is creating a phylogenetic tree in R.
My presentation is going to be probably less technical on some level. I'm not a phylogeneticist, but I had let me put up my slides so I can remember what I'm supposed to say. So let me see.
That's the best part about having a slideshow, is that you can kind of just read off of it.
Yes. So I call it molecular phylogenies. So why did I study this as a creationist? My boss told me to. That kind of settled it, whether I wanted to or not. And as I'll say that some creationists use it for this thing of baraminology and dating of Adam and Eve. I'm totally not into that. No offense to my colleagues who study it. That's just not why I had to study it. My interest level in this was actually 3 specific missions. One was falsifying Ono's 1984 frameshift hypothesis to cast a shadow on Ken Miller and Dennis Venema. Ken Miller was of the Kitzmiller versus Dover fame. To also affirm a quietly acknowledged lack of universal common ancestors in proteins and genes. And I'll share the citations here. That's not saying they're denying universal common ancestry of organisms. It's a little more subtle with proteins and genes, and it could even be an ambiguous question. And also using some phylogeny tools to inform structural biology and protein science. So a lot of this is actually skirting mostly the issue of universal common ancestry. I was sent to the NIH, the FAES graduate school. There's Eugene Koonin, the head of the evolutionary genomics group, and one of the staff members in that photo was my professor. I'm not going to identify him. In the class, my professor, we actually were studying bioinformatics, but then there was just like 3 or 4 classes on phylogenetics. So that's the extent of my exposure. It's kind of shallow relative to a professional evolutionary biologist. But I bought this book because it was recommended. It's kind of the Bible of inferring phylogenies, and it's a painful read. Just so full of math, and no disrespect to Joe Felsenstein, but there was so much other stuff I had to study, like say chemistry. Otherwise, I really wanted to devote more time to understanding what was in the book. So I alluded briefly, we could talk about it later, about protein classifications and universal common ancestry in proteins. Again, that's not the same question as universal common ancestry organisms. And there was also, it kind of originated with Kunin himself and this paper on Wolf, where they started talking about the web of life versus a tree of life. But that's only dealing with proteins, not necessarily organisms. So the real gold, the beginning of it all, is this gentleman, Ken Miller, Brown University professor. He was in the infamous Kitzmiller versus Dover intelligent design. He was like a star expert witness. And he said something that I eventually used phylogenetic methods to disprove. And then also Dennis Venema, more recently, he had a book, Adam in the Genome. By the way, both Ken Miller and Dennis Venema are professing Christians. So this isn't about atheism versus Christianity. This is more among theists discussing what they believe is the scientific answer. He used this something that this paper by Ono, and Ono's paper, and I'll show a picture of Ono's paper, was mentioned all the way back in 1985 in an article by the NCSE, National Center for Science Education, that said new proteins without God's help. And I'm just going to skip over the paragraph, otherwise we won't have time. So just to reassure you all that the final disposition is that we are able to disprove this claim here, that they referenced Ono's hypothesis, which I'll go into. You could see it here. Here's the website, and you could see the discussion. They totally trashed my paper, but they said, you're right. Your conclusions are right. And I said, that's great. We put this paper to 7 journals, got 7 rejections. And I just kind of laughed. I said, can you at least let us publish the rejection letter? Because that's what we really want. Because you said our conclusions are right, but maybe our paper sucks, but that's okay. And then they never got back to us. But thankfully, the editor-in-chief at Cell Reports, Steve Matheson, he kind of came indirectly to my defense. He said, your conclusions are right, but I don't think I'm going to publish your paper. And I said, thank you very much, sir. That's what really matters. Just to know, just the personal vindication that we were right. Yeah, it would have been nice to have it in a journal, but it never got there. There was an evolutionary biologist there who also backed me, in Joshua Swamidas, and my NIH professor. So there's one aspect of this also. We do structural biology. I worked with Joe DeWeese, who's a creationist, but he is published in the journal Nature. So he's a young Earth creationist, but he was published in the journal Nature, doing work on topoisomerase. And we actually used the phylogenetic tools in Mega. It's not really building phylogenetic trees, but it had kind of nice graphics. And sometimes that's why you just get a tool, just because it had some nice graphics and it had some sequence alignment. And we were able to do a poster and a peer-reviewed abstract at the conference. It was some conference on experimental biology in 2019. And no, this is not an April Fool's joke, even though it was published on April 1st. So that's me and Joe there. I'm going to show some software that with Phylogeny software tonight to show how I build diagrams like that. So, okay, so this was the paper I was trying to falsify, this 1984 paper that said bacteria acquired the ability to digest nylon after it got invented. A lot of people said, well, obviously it had to evolve that ability after nylon got invented in 1935. It couldn't possibly have pre-existed. And I was tasked to go investigate whether that was true. And the phylogenetic methods actually helped show that the capability to digest nylon actually pre-existed before the invention of nylon. And that was kind of radical sounding, but we needed the phylogenetic methods to show that the bacteria were ancient. And I kind of started the dumb way from Ono's paper because I was ignorant. And you learn the hard way sometimes. I go to the School of Hard Knocks. So I went to Ono's paper and he had this sequence listed. and I entered all the A, C, T's, and G's manually to begin my search. Okay, I did not know what I was doing. So I entered it in, and little did I know that I didn't have to do it that way. But let me show see if I have it here. So the sequence is, you can actually just take a piece of the sequence. And some of you know this, you could take a piece of the sequence. So instead of entering the whole thing, what you can do is you could go to the NIH website. Let's see if I could find it. And you can just say blast in. And this is really risky because I'm actually going to try to do this live, and people say, don't ever use software in a live demonstration because it's not going to work. Okay, so I'm going to take a risk here and do what they told me not to do. Because they said, what you want to do is have all your screen captures and not do a live presentation, because you know how computers are. So you just go to this blast in site, just type in blast in and it'll find it. It takes you to the NIH and you just press this. So I entered just a segment of the sequence. It'll take about a minute. It's going to grind through while it, look how quickly it found, let's see if it found the whole sequence. Sure enough, look at this. It got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of all the billions and billions of species and proteins out there. It narrowed it down to 6 that have that unique sequence. And I'm just going to click here and we can actually see the sequence. Let's see if I could get that sequence.
That's really cool that you can do that in browser.
Oh, okay. That's what I wanted to ask you. Do you use Blast for any of your work?
So no, so I've toyed around with Blast in the past, mostly just for personal reasons, just toying around with. But because I deal with the relationships between species, I generally deal with like consensus and block trees rather than going down and tracking down individual genes myself.
Okay.
And part of that is because, unfortunately, because I'm looking at such a broad range of species, like most people haven't sequenced any of the genome of like Semnopithecus entellus, right? Like, so because of that, it really limits my ability unless I'm working with trees that folks have already kind of put together, if that makes sense. But I'm very eager to learn how to use Blast. So I'm excited for this. I'm loving what you're doing here.
Okay, thank you. Because just for the audience that's listening, one reason Erica and I decided to talk, we're just like graduate students comparing notes and saying, we're clueless. Let's just see where we are. And I was worried people would just be looking down on us and saying, you guys are ignorant. Well, it's like, yeah, relative to you, probably. There's some skilled people. But when Erica was describing how she did her work, I said, I'd like to learn how you do your work because I don't know how to do it. I've never even heard of the tools that you use. So
I feel
anyway.
the same way. So this is a perfect swap, right?
Okay, so mutual benefit. So then there's some painful things here. I'm not going to go into all the painful details, but you can imagine I was just crawling. And the way to sometimes learn this, because if you don't have someone who knows what they're doing, you have to just go to websites and pray and hope you get what you're looking for. So I found out that you could see here it uses the word NILB, and I'm like, okay, that's a clue. Why don't I go to some website and see if I could do a search on NILB? Okay, that seems really ridiculous, but when you're knocking your head on the wall and your boss is saying, I want you to falsify this hypothesis, it's like, well, I'm going to try. I don't know what I'm doing. So I type in NILB. This is the Uniprot or Uniprot website. This is just a huge knowledge base of all the proteins, just a really good database. And so I type NILB, and then I find all these creatures that have what they call homologs. Eric, can you explain what a homolog is? Your definition is probably better than mine.
Oh man, yeah. So a homolog is essentially like if you're comparing two. I actually might butcher this worse than you would, just because I tend to steer clear of the specifics with genetics. But a homolog is essentially like it's if you're lining up two genomes, right, and you're trying to see, okay, how similar or dissimilar are they overall? Even if you don't find like an identical match per match, you might find a homolog, which is like very, very close to what you've got, right? So you've got one protein and then a homolog for that protein is essentially like the version that works for that gene. How would I do, Sal?
Well, Professor, what can I say? They're structurally, there are any sort of metrics for similarity, but it's like, that's close enough. And, usually you sort of know it by experiencing it. So I got 897 homologs for this protein / gene. And right away I was excited because I said, okay, that's proving this gene pre-existed in 1935 if it's that widespread and they're sufficiently different. That's for the aficionados out there. I'm just cutting to the chase, but I'm going to show the software. So one can go here and look at all of the Nile B proteins and all those 797 species. And it's a little different with each species. And then you can get the amino acid sequence in this format, FASTA, what they call FASTA format. Are you familiar with that? I'm sure you are.
Yes, so, in the literature, yes, but I have not done it myself.
So you can see that this is like 480 some amino, over 400 amino acids right there, and that's the spelling of it. Each letter represents an amino acid in that protein. And then I collected these, and I'll tell you it's agonizing, and I'm kind of glad I did the paper 3 years ago, because at the time they only Uniprot had only like maybe 500 or less in their database. But now, because of doing all the sequencing, it added more. I went through 1,000 of these and collected all the FASTA sequences manually. That was just miserable. But I just trying to, make the case and make it thorough. And we were going to make some analyses with that. So after all that agony, going through BLAST and Uniprot, I got huge numbers of sequences, but I'm going to represent 9 of them right here, 10 of them, just selected sequences. I tried to get those what I felt is representative, and anyone can build this. The point was that, why did I pick those 10? I just said, this is just a sampling just for illustration purposes. And then what you could do is once you've collected these, and you can put them all in one file. So these are the various sequences of the homologs across different species. We can now use this tool called Mega. And I'm going to violate the thing that I said you're never supposed to do, a live demonstration. Boy, this could really, well, I got to add some drama to this, right? So,
yeah.
So Mega is molecular evolutionary genetics tool. Now, analysis. Some of the professionals do use this tool, but it's not considered as good as some of the others. But it's a good introductory tool, and a lot of creationists use it. Nathaniel Jeanson and Rob Carter use it to do their Y chromosome and their mtDNA stuff. So it's popular among the creationists. So all I'm going to do, you can download this for free. All I'm going to do is just load that file that had all those sequences that I had. And it'll ask if you want to align it, and I'll say yes. I'm already having some issues here. Let me try to close everything, see if I could do that.
Sometimes you just gotta reset it. Sometimes that's
okay. Let me see, it doesn't have any way to close it. So I'm going to quit. And this is really dangerous drama. You can actually see me totally fall on my face here, Erica.
Listen, I anticipate R is going to crash on me at least once. So
okay, so such is the life of researchers, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's always something. That's just the works.
So let's try this again. So I'm going to try to do this from scratch. And I'm going to show that I can make similar
This is freestyling,
nested.
Sal.
I'm sorry.
For your freestyling.
Yes. How did I get that? Let me try it again. File, open. Supplementary. Okay, I'm going to open a FASTA file, and it's going to invite me to align it. So these are the 10 species here. And let me make sure I'm... See, these are the 10 species here, but then their protein isn't aligned. So then I can do this alignment, and I'm going to use muscle. There's other alignment tools. The professionals know which is the better one for their work. But after I align it, it'll give, first it'll prompt me, and I always use the defaults because I don't know any better. And you can see now the protein is aligned. Now, with all this coloring, it's like kind of hard to tell what the important features. It's like, why are they homologs? Why are they similar? Well, we can use a little bit to help visualize things. And let me see, use background color. Now we could see the similarities. There's only 5% similarity, but that's enough to identify them as being basically the same homolog. It's just kind of like the same architecture. It's like you can distinguish an airplane from a car, even though they're different models of cars. You know, it's an airplane, a car, or a blender, or a piano. They're different architectures. So homologs are kind of in a family of architectures. And
That's
so the important
way of putting it.
Yes, I actually had a slide with where I showed a blender, a helicopter, and a car. So I said that's the way to kind of understand. Thank you. That means a lot to me, Erica. So I brought this to my professor. I said, look at this alignment I did. And I said, I think this means that this protein is ancient. It didn't emerge after 1935. And in his Russian accent, he said, absolutely. So I was like, thank you. Just that the boss will be really happy. I wanted to thank him for that. So he just looked at that. That's all it took, 2 minutes. But it took me like half a summer of work crawling through it. And then I present myself to my professor, and he said, oh, no problem. You're absolutely right. And I mean, that's how quick some of these professionals can just be able to pick up a decision. So now let's see what else we could do. We can build a phylogenetic tree. So now that I've aligned this, I'm supposed to be able to save this. So I'm going to save, I think I have to export this in mega format. Now I can build a phylogenetic tree with these 10. So I like this UPGMA tree. All right, there are all these other trees, and Joe Felsenstein, that's why he wrote the book, to tell you the pluses and minuses for each of these. I just kind of like this one, just because I think it makes prettier graphs. I know that's a terrible criteria for making phylogeny.
It's not. It's honestly, it's really not, because I've been docked points because my graph was ugly. So I've been docked marks for that. You got to have a pretty looking graph, or else people don't get it as well, I guess.
So there you go. That's unrooted phylogenetic UPGMA. And this is the best part. It makes a caption for you, and you just sound so sophisticated. So the evolutionary history was inferred using the UpGMA method. The optimal tree with a sum branch length equal to 3.9, etc. is shown. The tree is drawn to scale with branch lengths in the same units as those of the evolutionary distances used to infer their phylogenetic tree. The evolutionary distances were computed using the Poisson correction method and are the units of the number of amino acid substitutions per site, etc. I'm just like, this is really cool. You could just be pumping out papers and not know what you're doing.
Well,
hopefully you get some editor that's just eager to accept your money for open access. I'm sorry. I'm being
no, please. I was just going to say that's a sweet hack right there, because I had to come up for some practicals when I was working in R for the first time this past year. And I'm like going through, and I'm like, okay, man, shoot, how am I going to report this? I was like, so I have my thing, but how do I say what my thing is?
Yeah,
so that's really nice.
And then they'll even give you the proper way to do the citation. I'm just like, man, so you just cut and paste. But you could see basically you get the blast sequences, and that's an art in itself, what you pick, and then you just throw it in, and you saw how quickly you could build this tree. And if you, we could do, oh boy, see, now you got me kind of happy. Let's try maximum. I really like neighbor joining. I like neighbor joining.
Neighbor joining is cool. Yeah, neighbor joining.
Okay, let's just see what happens. And you get another tree, and it gives you also the caption and the references. I mean, it's just have fun. Now, there's other ways you could view it, and you actually had one. Let's see. Was there a way I could? There was a way that I could view this where I could get it to give that. Here it is. We can do the radiation graph. It's the same graph.
Ah, that one. Those are nice.
So, but I think the point I'd like to say to my creationist colleagues, all right, so you send your kid off to biology school. They're going to a university. What are they gonna encounter? They're going to see nested hierarchies. Just like that. They're going to be able to build them. You could see it didn't take me long to build this. And what are they going to say? It's like, oh my goodness, you told me those didn't exist, or there are problems with it. I'm building them all the time. And that's what I try to tell people. It's like, because I work with this data, I can see these nested hierarchies all day long. You can't run away from it. So as a creationist, it's like, you gotta be straight with these people. I mean, you owe it to the next generation of students just to level with them. And so anyway, I'm just going to do one more, and that's about. I have just a little commentary, just kind of a. I want to see what the circle diagram looks like. So we could do a circle diagram. It's still the same. That's not as pretty. So anyway, that was Mega, and then now let me go back to my slideshow. So what was the outcome of this? I showed the blast uniprot. Now, when you saw those strong alignments, those corresponded to very important residues in the enzymatic process. So this is where the phylogenetic methods help inform structural biology. Structural biology is kind of the study of the structures of the molecules. And so like I said, you have nested hierarchies. You can't run away from it. You're going to find them all over the place. And so this confirmed a forgotten paper. It said here, most of the amino acid substitutions from the ancestor of Nile B gene family to its descendants of today might have occurred before the beginning of nylon manufacture. So a lot of people said there's no way a bacteria could be able to have the ability to digest nylon unless it evolved it after 1935. That's actually falsified. And they give the figure using their estimate at that's 140 million years. So this claim by the NCSE was falsified. This paper from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences was falsified. This paper, indirectly related from Nature, was falsified. And I really would like to thank my opponents. For a change, they showed a lot of integrity and said Sal was right. So champagne. So thank you.
Yeah, there really is nothing better than having someone who really does know what they're talking about, like a supervisor, an advisor, or a boss, being like, you know what, this is some good work. I like what I see here. And you're like, wait a second, is it possible I got it right? And then it's like, holy cow, the imposter syndrome is gone for just a second. That was really, really cool. I very much like how you I very much like how the blast stuff seemed really, really easy to get into Mega.
Yes, and that's what I liked about the way that it was taught at the NIH. They knew most of the classmates there were either medical doctors, postdocs in a totally different field. And it's like, no, we're not going to make them professional evolutionary biologists. Let's just give them the simplest tools where they could do something like this in an afternoon. Right. And that was my contribution to our discussion today.
Yeah. No, I think that was really, really cool. I imagine too that becomes incredibly useful whenever you want to isolate something very, very particular. right? And you want to see how that hashes out with the phylogenetic tree. Because typically, with what I do, it's blocker consensus trees, and it's okay, how do these hash out with species, right? Which I think that's a really cool tool for isolating specific trees with specific genes. Because with what I do, it's much more the conglomerate of multiple studies rather than the specifics. And I think that very frequently it calls for being able to say, all right, let's say I want to look at the relationship between, in my case, 6 different Trichopithecus species and this particular gene to figure out how one group diverges from another. Well, a consensus tree isn't going to do anything for me there. What I need to do is what you've done here and type that specific gene into BLAST and see what I get, and then run that through Mega. So I think that's a super useful tool.
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating. One thing I did see is that when we study individual proteins or genes, that's where there is an active discussion among evolutionary biologists. It's like, well, they're going to form, many times they'll form similar trees, but they're not exactly. It's like, okay, but then which one will take priority and which one will we use to deter, to assert what we believe the correct phylogeny is in terms of organisms. And that's definitely an active discussion. And I don't know enough about that. And, I got what I needed from that class, and that's as far as it went. I did not get involved in this whole mitochondrial Eve thing or this biramenology.
Right.
And I just said, guys, this is just something I'm not interested in. I mean, I'm glad you guys are doing it. I want to study proteins. Okay. I'm not a geneticist. And, I was kind of laughing a little bit when they were making fun of you, because they had that SFT had that clip of you saying, I'm not a geneticist. Well, I said, I'm not a geneticist either. So.
I find that very silly because it's one of those things where it's like, I think one of the coolest parts about having a community of people who are into the science is that when you aren't good in one field, you can ask your friends who are, and then you get this cool mutual exchange of information, like what we're doing here, although, on a more, I suppose, field level. But that's the awesome thing about, one, pestering your friends and having friends in different fields, but also just the exchange of information and knowing your limitations. It opens up this whole new horizon for, look, I don't know this stuff as well as you do, so please teach me so that I can, in turn teach other people if I encounter those who need it, and then I'll do you a solid if you ever need me for it. Well, so I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I think this is probably, unfortunately, maybe one of the few shows where we could actually we have an overlap in kind of our level of understanding and also topics, because you strike me as being very much on the morphological and fossils and skeletons.
Yeah.
And I am not that. I am at the protein molecular, just the total opposite end. And I said, there's no way we'll ever debate because you'll be on one end and I'll be on the other. And just like, we're going to talk past each other. But today we get to help each other on a topic of molecular phylogeny.
Right. Yeah, we've hit this nice sweet spot where we intercept, which is nice. And as we've discussed before, I consider us too good of friends to engage in a debate.
Oh yeah.
Discussions are fun.
Yes.
Yeah. No thanks.
Not the modern day debate theater.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, and we were talking about this. We agreed who will totally beat either of us. The flat earthers. And you mentioned something about pigeons and playing chess with a pigeon.
Yeah. I said to Sal in kind of the pre-show, engaging with flat earthers is like playing chess with a pigeon, because you sit down and the pigeon knocks over all the pieces, poops on the board, and struts around like it's won, right? And that's exactly every experience with a flat earther that I've ever had. So. But I think you reach a level there where it's like, I don't know that I could have this kind of conversation on anything with a flat earther for sure. But it's I'm very fortunate that we've hit this intersection.
Well, that's about all I had, and I know you probably were going to actually show your computer demonstration now.
Oh yeah, we'll see. I'm just waiting for my whole thing to crash. So. And this is something that I'm relatively new at, so I've got my notes in the background ready to consult when I'm like, okay, crap.
Oh, is this going to be a live software demonstration here?
I do. Oh yeah, I've got to pull up.
Oh boy, we're violating the cardinal rule, both of us.
Yeah, I know.
We get the merits for that.
I know. Yeah, I'm just waiting for everything to just not work and my packages to not install and like all the bad, horrible things. But we'll see. So I'll get started, and since mine may perhaps be I'm hoping to be about the length that you are, but if I do go over, I do want you to feel comfortable with like stopping me for conversation or whatever. Because I think, I think that's like half the fun is the banter. So yeah, so okay, gang, here's what I'm doing. So here's what I've got for you. I use a statistical program called RStudio. It is open source. Anyone can use it. You can literally just go RStudio, right? And it'll pop up, and you can just download RStudio and do stats, do biostats if you very much feel like it. And the kind of long and short of how you got to prep for that and how we need to kind of prepare for what I'm doing here today is you want to go down here, right? And you want to create a nice file over here on the side. I've called the file that we're working with today Workshop. And if you click it, you'll see that I've got a directory in R. I've got a file for data and a file for the code that we're going to be looking at. And that's kind of the long and short of what you need to have ready so that you can access the files once you boot up R, which is conveniently right here. So this is what R looks like. Try to ignore this absolutely heinous clustered phylogenetic tree down in the bottom. I'll show you how to not do that because this is a horrible font size. It was like the last phylogenetic tree that I did. But once you have R booted up and everything like that, we want to create a new script, which you do just like that. And I'll, title it so that my data can be nice and organized, and we'll just call it Workshop Live, just like that, which is, exciting and clickbaity. But then the question is, okay, what do we do? This looks like a software program, and I don't really know how to begin. Well, the first thing is we have to get some data. So we're going to want to hop on over here to the 10K trees, which is what I use for phylogenetic trees. Now, R you can use for pretty much anything, any kind of statistical analysis that you want to run, you can do it in R. I did a multivariate regression analysis for my thesis in R, and if I showed you the code for that, you'd cry just like I did every day that I was working on it because it's very lengthy. But this is 10K trees. This is the consensus tree right here for, I believe, the primates. Essentially what they do is they are also kind of an open source group, and you can actually submit your own phylogenies, supposing that you've done these trees for yourself and actually sequence stuff. We see they have at the bottom, we're highly interested in posting additional mammal phylogenies provided by other research groups. For more information, click here. And then I'm sure you have to pass a rigorous peer review before you can do it. But the 10K trees project is basically this, it's very similar to GenBank in that it's like, we want to make access to these phylogenetic trees, this data, easy for anyone to get into, which is good. And we love open source science, all kinds. And this about section, motivation and goals kind of tells you like, okay, why are they doing it? What's the whole point? They talk about how the consensus trees are reached with a Bayesian analysis, but you can also download block trees. And a block tree is basically like, hey, here's all of the trees that we have, all of the potential trees. And if you're perhaps looking at a specific gene, you probably would get one of those mini trees. But the consensus is reached on a Bayesian analysis, and so it's pretty likely the one that you're going to want if you're not looking at something specific and you want to just do a general phylogeny. So the how to use section, if you're curious, you can come here, and they've got some nice exercises here at the bottom that you can get into to teach you how to use it. And it's not limited to R. I believe they do some stuff with alternative programs. But then we reach the trees. So these are the trees. Now, I am very biased, so I would like to do primates first. So I would pick on the primate tree right here because this is the mammal group that I want to look at. And then I'm going to go to the download tree section, and we're going to reach this page here. Now, I'm going to do the Wilson and Reeder phylogeny here, just because that's what I use for my thesis, and I think it's a good phylogeny. And we're only going to do the consensus block today. So we're going to do a chronogram rather than a phylogram. And then down here is where you can select all of your species. Now, in R, unless you're planning on kind of getting down and dirty with the programming, you can get these very bloated trees if you're not careful. So what we're going to do here is we're going to deselect all the primates, and we're going to pick some primates that we think are going to give us a very readable tree, maybe 50 primates. So we'll get a couple of lemurs in here, some members of eulemur, maybe some closely related eulemurs. Maybe we'll add some, we love the indrids, lemur cata. These are your strepsirrhine primates. Of course, all of these guys are. Maybe we'll put microscopic in there. The brown mouse lemur is actually the smallest primate. And the largest primate is, of course, the gorilla. Maybe we'll add one loris in there, or we'll do Loris tardigratus. This is one of the cuter ones. So if you guys have seen those videos go viral before of lorises doing their cute little thing with their hands, they're very, very cute. We'll do a galago as well, senegalensis. One tarsi or two, put that one in there. Pithecids, these guys are really cool. We'll do a red wakari, but typically they include TD monkeys and sakis as well. And then we'll do an owl monkey, the Aotis, those are the owl monkeys, maybe a marmoset right here. Continuing on down, these are the squirrel monkeys, your Cimeres and your, I think they've got the cebids up here too, the capuchins. Oh wait, they're, no, they should be here. Yeah, here they are. Cebus capucinus and Apella, those are the ones that I know pretty well. We'll put a howler in there, Aluata, visible, and Brachyteles arachnoides. You know what? We're putting in too many. We need to take one of these out. Sorry, Brachyteles arachnoides. And then we'll add some of the Cercopithecids. We'll do the Midas monkey, and we'll go ahead and do a Chlorocebus member. Those are your vervets. The Papuines, these are going to be like your macaques, your ground monkeys, and also your mangabes and baboons. So we'll do macaques, and then we'll do a Hamadryas baboon. And I think, too, just to be interesting, we'll do 2 macaques so that we can see what that looks like once we plot it. And we'll add a couple of the Pileocolobus in here, Colobus goriza. That's a beautiful mantled colobus monkey. They're very, very pretty. And then we get down to hominoidea, so we'll add all the hominoids. Of course, we have to add the gibbons, Panpeniscus and Pantroglodytes. And we will also do the orangs. And we will add, it's sad that they don't have the Neanderthals in here, but we'll add Homo sapiens as well, because they do indeed fit within the phylogenetic tree for primates. So we will download the trees, which is going to take just a second, and then we download it in a Nexus format, and it pops down here in the bottom. And then what you want to do is pull up that data folder that you have and drag the consensus tree into the data. Now I'll click on the data, and I'll say this name is horrible, it sucks. And I'm going to name it Prime Work. So we know it's the primate one for the workshop, right? And then I'm going to hop over into R. Now, R is what we see here, and I've got my code that I worked on previously over here. And all of these packages I've already installed, but these are the packages that you absolutely have to have if you're going to run a phylogenetic analysis within R, because these packages, they're essentially like mods for R. You could put them in there to do specific things. So perhaps if you were doing like comparative genomics, you would have a completely different package that you want to download. And these are the ones that I use. So I use Ape, Fangorn, Fight Tools, and Geiger. And once you click the install packages here, typically R does this nice thing where it auto-completes. So you'd put in, you'd type in down here, install.packages, there it pops up. And then I would put in quotation marks Ape, so it would know that that's the package that I wanted to install, and then I would control click that, and that would be all she wrote for installing the package. But then you also have to recall it, so you have to pull it up using the library functions, which are down here. You control click to get all of those. Then what you have to do is you have to set up your pathway. So I'm going to put this over here just so we know where it's at, so that it sets the path. It knows where it's going to be pulling that data from. And make sure you do those forward slashes, because one time I worked for like 2 hours. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't set the path. It turns out it was just because I was using the wrong direction of slash.
If it makes you feel better, as a early software developer in my career, it took me longer than that, and I'm ashamed to say, okay?
It's so...
And I was
It's
supposedly
so
a computer
tragic, isn't it?
professional.
You're just like, dang, okay, I guess this is my life now. Like, I'm goofing it up. And R is very finicky with where commas and periods and all that kind of stuff is. But once you get the hang of it, it's a very nice tool.
A punctuation mark can humble you.
Isn't that
real
the
fast.
truth? I know. It really tragic is the only way of putting it, just because it's all of that work just down the drain. So next you're going to want to read in the Nexus file, because as you can see from over here, all of these ones that I've previously downloaded, as well as the one we're working with today, which is prime work, is a Nexus file. So you want to re-download that in, and I've called this prime work. So we'll just call it prime work here as well. And we'll go ahead and call it prime work again, .next, prime work.next, like that. And then you're going to run it, and it'll create an object for prime work over here. So here's where the consensus tree is located. This is, if you click it, right, it'll pull up kind of the technical version of what it is. And I don't know what all of that means. I know what some of it means. And then the easiest part is going to be the initial plot, where I'm just going to plot prime work like that using the plot function, enter it. And then over here, we have a nice phylogenetic tree. And the cool thing is that it groups macaque, obviously our macaques and our other ground monkeys are grouped really closely together. All the way up here, we've got our strepsirrhines and we've got our hominoids, and the New World monkeys are all in here. And this is just a really nice, easy way to kind of see what's going on. And like Sal said, there's cool like versions that you can do here too. So I've got a couple of like fancier versions for plotting this, even though they're probably not going to work because that's what I need them to do is work, which means they won't, of course. So plot tree, that's the function. And then you're going to want to change carn file because I was working with the carnivores earlier, to prime work like that. And there it is. And you've got this cute little tree that's radial in nature. Oops. To pull it up in a separate thing because R gets annoyed. And it's kind of small. I don't love that. But if you were really to commit to this, you could kind of blow it up and, of course, add pretty much as many species as you'd like. And the nice thing about R too is that you can get a lot more information about the trees that you're dealing with using the summary function. So I could summary and say, okay, I want to learn more about the primates that I downloaded. So prime work like that. And you definitely want to like double space that and keep the work area looking nice. And it'll just tell me about a little bit about the tree, right? It'll give me kind of the phylogenetic tree, the number of nodes, the number of tips, the branch lengths, all of that. And I can use this information to then change the tree with regard to like how I want it to look, how long the branches are going to be, even like the silly file of the font, if I so feel like it. And the nice thing about R is because it's open source, if you want to do something in it, someone's probably done it out there. And that's going to be like a quick Google search. And that's kind of how you just load it in there. Now you can kind of do a ton of different stuff with it. So if you wanted to do a phylogenetic correction, like for instance that I'd done with a with my thesis, right? That's going to be an entirely different thing. You've got to do a fitted model and work that in. And I feel like it's a little. I was thinking about maybe doing that, and then I was like, I don't know. I think that's going to be a little bit overkill because I tend to get sick of and/or overwhelmed by R if I spend too much time with it. My one of my advisors said to me once, he was like, you want to quit R while you're happy with it because otherwise you will grow to resent it, which is 100% true. Now, one thing that I think is a useful function if you're doing big phylogenetic trees, because you saw that absolute hideous monstrosity of one down here a little bit earlier, and that's what I was fooling around with up here. So perissodactyls are going to be a pretty easy phylogenetic tree. That's just the split of like tapirs, rhinos, and equids. And again, this is a consensus tree, so it's a Bayesian analysis of all of the trees that are currently available with the genetic data in kind of like GenBank or the like. But let's say that you want to work with a bigger file. Let's say I wanted to work with all of the carnivores that are listed in 10K trees. If I was going to do that, I would end up with something that looks just as bad as that thing I was showing you earlier. So you would plot it in using that read nexus file, and you would plot it down here. We'll take away the neighbor joining, and you will end up with this. This is not something that will work. Even if you zoom in, you can't read any of the names. And that's because you're looking at well over 100, 200 individual species. So if you're looking at that and you're like, wow, that really sucks, I would say, yeah, you're right. You can try changing the font size, but it doesn't really work all that well. And so in this case, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and use the subtree plot function. So that's going to be right here. You have to create a second file, a second object. So I called it carn file 2 because it's the carnivore file 2. And I address that as an object, create a subtree plot, address which, again, just because it's overkill, which data I want to pull from. And you're going to put weight equals true. That just tells R kind of how to fit it in. And then you click enter. And all this stuff is going to happen down here where it's treating all of the nodes, 246. And then you get this. So at first you're like, okay, well, this looks like an uglier version because now there's 2 of them. And to that I would say, yeah, it does. Okay, well, R encountered a fatal error. The session was terminated. Start new session. See, Sal? You're bad, my friend.
That's why you don't. That's why we're not supposed to do live demonstrations.
Oh my God. It really genuinely was just like, nah, we're going to go ahead and crash that right now. But
well, I just remember my professors trying to teach us, and they said, we're never supposed to do this, but how else are they going to show the students?
Yeah.
When they're going to try to walk us through the software. And actually, if it crashed, that's actually helpful in one way. It's like, okay, this is not unusual. If it happens to me, it's going to happen to you. Just get over it,
I get, yeah. I mean, that's really the way you got to look at it. I mean, the nice thing is R is like, it saves a bunch of backup work and stuff. So we've still got all of our stuff. All I did was just reopen the project by going to File and Open Project and just open a new one. But we're gonna try it again because I demanded of R that you see how this subtree thing works because I want that. So let's try it here again. Oh no, it's going to make us okay, well, this is a good learning opportunity too. So here's how you install the packages. You control click on each of them and you'll get a bunch of like scary stuff down here in red. Don't be freaked out by that. It'll even probably tell you, hey, this package was made in a previous version of R. Don't be afraid of all that. That's, the red is an intimidating color, but really and truly it's just letting you know how it's running through and uploading everything. And another nice thing about R is you can do all this like from the console here. So while you do have to pull things from the internet, like for your trees and setting them up in your data, you don't really have to do it once you're in R because you can download all these packages here. You don't have to do it anywhere else. So again, we're going with Ape, Fangorn, Phytools, and Geiger, which are basically, again, just the packages that help you make the pretty looking trees if you want to make a pretty looking tree. Or in this case, they make the whole situation a lot more difficult because we have to download all of them just so I can show you how to do this subtree plot. But you control click all of those again. If control clicking is too much, you can literally just click run up here. That's another way to do it. So we'll go ahead and read it in again. We'll set that path, carn file. We'll plot it down here at plot tree carn file. And again, it's hideous. And then we will run the subtree plot and it does all the nodes, treats them, does all of that stuff. And then here it is. And the point here with this cursor is you can click on any of the nodes like that, give it a second, and then it'll close things up here over on the right. It turns the ugly plot on the right into something that is a little bit more kind of palatable. I think that you can technically come over here and change the font size again, but I'm worried I'm going to crash it if I do that. So I'm just going to let the font be big and go focus in on like a closer node. So here are the leopards, for instance. It shows you how all of the members of Leopardus are related to one another. The cool thing about 10K trees is that they're working too with some of the paleogenomics community. So getting, genetics from some of the hominids like Neanderthals and things of that nature, as well as like the mastodons. So you can see, here fossas and some of our other lesser well-known. If you search in here hard enough, you'll find the viverids, and the viverids always get overlooked, civets and things like that. And yeah, so this subtree function does make it a lot easier to kind of explore these monstrous looking trees. Here, of course, are bears versus Arctos, and some of our almost like false bears, real bears, and false bears, quote unquote. And that's kind of what I got for R. My original plan was like, well, we can, because you really can do this for any of these. And because it was so nice and pretty over here with our kind of smaller work with the primates, where it's a lot more palatable because you're looking at basically just a much smaller sample size. But realistically, if you're actually running these kinds of analyses, you're probably going to be dealing with a lot of species. So it's nice to have that subtree plot function. There is a more, again, like I said earlier, there is a better way to do it. You essentially load in the tips of the branches, and it'll show you specifically, it'll number them out, and you can do it in that way too. Or you can export it. And if you export it out of R, you can get something that's a lot prettier. But because it's taking the work to export it, it's high crash risk and it takes a long time. So I realized that some of this was a little bit ugly, so to speak. But I find R to be a pretty decent way of working. And if this is something that maybe didn't bore everyone to death, like we could maybe do like another R thing at some point. Okay, I'm getting shade in the chat for not using night mode. Anyways, I don't know if you thought that was interesting, Sal. I enjoy it. It's fun to work with.
I think you scared me away from
I'm
R.
so sorry. I know it's an intimate. It really isn't that bad.
No. I have. There's so many. Like really, the situation is there's just so many things to learn, and we can only divide the time. And one thing that I did see my colleagues who use R, it can generate really nice graphs because people had created some libraries, and you can get some really beautiful plots. And when we're submitting research papers, it's like, our graphs look just terrible compared to, what we see in the journal. It's just, it's like almost like half the battle is just trying to make it look good. Like you have, you could present the same data and it just looks kind of, not very compelling. And I'm just like, yeah, it's just the way that the human eye will process things. And so always, I hope if I'm a co-author, there'll be someone on the team that can really do R well, because I don't want to be the one doing it. So you're that person now, right?
God no. Oh my gosh. Yeah. If learning R taught me anything, it's I'm going to be like some of the advisors on the staff who like absolutely. What's the word I'm looking for? They call it in from like other stats people. Like they're like, I get my stats friend to do the R, and I'm like, okay.
I have just a question. I mean, there's stuff that you presented today that is utterly new to me. What is this 10K trees? Did they, how did they do their trees? Is it like whole genome or select?
So it depends. The interesting thing is with 10K trees is it really does depend on which groups of organisms you're looking at. Because so like I said in my PowerPoint for the primates, which again is what I care about, only 12 of the primates, and that's a lot for the mammals, have their genomes entirely sequenced. So because of that, when you're trying to generate these big trees that deal with so many different organisms, that most of which haven't had their entire genome sequenced, they tend to use as many genes as possible. So there's an excellent paper that I cited in my bibliography at the end of that PowerPoint presentation that was a molecular phylogeny of all the primates. And they sampled 54 genes for, I think it was 240 something species, and generated a phylogenetic tree using those 54 known genes. And that's kind of how it works with regard to making the large scale full on order phylogenetic trees. But if you want to know where the specifics comes from, 10K trees has a nice section when you're actually like looking at the data sets, where it's like, hey, if you want to know where each data set for each species came from, here's our kind of bibliography. And it's this massive document. I mean, it's a couple hundred pages. So you can actually say, okay, like let's say I want to look at where they got the data set for like Cymangs, for like Symphalangus and Dactylus. Then I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to go into their database and be like, all right, here's the paper where they got the genome or at least the genes for that specific gibbon. and then at least I can cite that. So, but yeah, it's a really good resource. They've got a whole lot of species, but they tend to stick to the mammals.
And so your role was really trying to add phylogenetic corrections to those data. Wow.
Yeah. So that's the danger of it, because I've got this really, if I do say so myself, I've got this really nice multivariate regression analysis with a continuous variable and like 5 or 6 categorical variables up against another continuous. And I had to model all of it in R. So it's like, that I can do. I can do a model in R very well. So I'm sitting there, I'm typing it in. I'm like, yeah, heck yes, this is a sweet looking model. I'm really happy with this. And I messaged my supervisor, and I'm like, I think I've got the results. And he goes, oh, sweet. Well, how'd you figure out the phylogenetic correction? We didn't have a meeting on that. And I was like, the what? So this was like 3 weeks ago, and so he ended up, getting me in touch with the guy who does the phylogenetic corrections. And I think I was telling you this earlier, but I might have been telling someone else. But I was telling my fiance, because he actually came when because he does programming. He's a computer programmer. So I was like, I cannot for the life of me figure out aspects of this phylogenetic correction stuff. And so he came in, and we were both fooling around with it. And, it took me, like, he helped me with some of the stuff. And then it took me like an additional week and a half to figure out how to actually run the correction. And then when I'm on the phone with my advisor this morning, to my actual R stats advisor, I was like, all right, how are my stats? He's like, they're great. And I'm like, how do I report the phylogenetic correction? He was like, you can just say you did one, because you did. He's like, you just say you did one. And I was like, that's it? I was like, I did the whole correction just so I can say that I did it? And he was like, I mean, yeah, because that you have to account for it or the data's worthless. But I was like, that much work for a sentence. One sentence. So very frustrating, but what are you going to do?
That was very informative.
I felt that yours was certainly more informative than mine. Yours is way less of an intimidating process. Like Mega feels a lot more user friendly and intuitive, certainly when compared with R. But
yeah, I think it's probably a very good introductory tool. And just for completeness in the discussions, the hard part is this is where the professionals go in. How did they decide to do rooting?
Right.
And then which of those algorithms do we, because they had 4 different ways, and Felsenstein's book goes into the pros and cons of each.
Yeah.
It is interesting when the competing algorithms, the differing algorithms will give a different tree. And it's like, okay, what do you do then? It's like, I wouldn't know. Know.
Yeah. You should look into, because I found myself asking the same question. I was like, all right, this was like a week ago. I'm like, okay, so I've got all these phylogenetic trees, because originally part of the problem why it took me so long was because I was working with the block trees, which is where it gives you like all of the different ones for each of the specific genes that they've got in their database. And so I'm working with them, and I was like, how do I decide which tree to use? And I was like, oh, right, there's a consensus. And then I'm thinking, okay, but how did they reach the consensus? And they do it by running a Bayesian analysis, which the Bayesian analysis, like how that works, I'm still trying to like square in my head. It's pretty mathy, right? But it's really, really cool. Like I sat down and was like reading about it, and I was like, this makes sense, but I'm also kind of an idiot with math. So I don't know how much I can regurgitate and make it conceptually.
Just to relate some of this, it's not that I'm trying to belittle the phylogenetic trees. It's just my interest in structural biology. They actually don't, they try to just process the different sequences. And I actually had a quote here because I wanted to talk just a tad about where some of this, the whole thing with nested hierarchies, a different way of looking at it. I'm just going to share, if I could share this. It's just
sure.
One quote. And it actually, now that you mentioned R, I'm going to have to find out if people use R for this sort of work. As far as I know, we were using Python. This Python just kind of built up from scratch. And various labs are doing this for various things. So instead of phylogeny, what they do, and this is from a book by William Bialek. He's either at Princeton or Yale. He's a biophysicist, National Academy member. This is from his book on biophysics, his textbook for his PhD students. And he was saying he's taking this huge amount of, instead of making a phylogenetic tree, they're going to take basically the same sequence data. But then what they try to do is actually infer protein structure from it, which I thought was really cool. And so I'm just going to fast forward to the last part that I highlighted. He said, this success raises the tantalizing possibility that we could read off the physical contacts between the amino acids and hence infer the three-dimensional structure of proteins from analysis of the covariations in amino acid substitutions across a large family.
Oh,
So it uses phylogenetic kind of language. And I'm actually working on a project right now where we take, where it began was with this, this is a very small data set. This was the one that I worked on with Joe DeWeese for that poster session. But we're not the only lab trying to do this. There are like 40 labs, and there's some that are so better funded than us. I heard that one consortium has 6 principal investigators trying to do this. I'm just like, Joe,
you're like,
we're not going to compete with these guys. We have to find a different niche. But what they can do is they could take the sequences across species, and then they can form the 3D structure. And that'll, because it's really hard. The way they do the 3D structure now is with X-ray crystallography. But what we're trying to do now is to find out other kind of interactions and stuff like the protein folding order. So we don't know where this is going, but the whole thing of being able to survey all the species, that's very phylogenetic-like language where they even use the idea of substitutions.
Right.
But that's just kind of a really cool way. And one of the times that we were doing this, I said, so we could pull off some of the species in our data set and it's not going to give us the 3D structure. You could almost predict what a species is supposed to have in it.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool?
That's very cool. Yeah.
So even though I didn't get into resolving, like, say, the phylogenetic relationship, it was kind of my start into this kind of alternative perspective of using sequence alignments and comparative in bioinformatics to inform structural biology. Wow. So the reason they're throwing so much money at this is it's nice if they could do fold prediction, because the pharmaceutical companies want to do fold prediction with that level of accuracy. And I've been hearing that some of these AI algorithms are very successful. And I said, did they use databases? And they said, yeah. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what they need. You just need a good database and an algorithm to kind of just put together these really not so obvious relationships. So I just wanted to share that for, why is Sal even weighing into this? There is some stuff professionally that I'm working on, and I'm only just like a minor. This is like kind of a quiet ID project. It's not that quiet because it's kind of spread all over the map, but they're like now about 10 or 15 guys that are ID friendly, just kind of spread across campuses, and said, "Oh, I want my stake in this," because there are a lot of them that have computer science backgrounds. And,
right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think phylogenetics is a weird thing, right? Because it's one thing that I found this past year that was very interesting to me is the weird impact that it has with behavior. At least in some of the species, because I'm taking it in the totally opposite direction, because there's cool things about structural proteins, and then I'm like, here's another weird cool thing about phylogeny that you wouldn't think, but it does have an impact. So macaques, right? They're these ground monkeys, and the one that everyone knows is the rhesus macaque, because that's the one that we've used as a model organism for a really long time. Rhesus macaques are real nasty little things. They are mean, man. They are some mean monkeys.
They look so cute.
I know they look so cute, but they are so mean. And you've got these 3. So within the group of macaques, macaca, the genus Macaca, you've got 3 major groups, and of these 3 groups, you've got 3 approximately. It depends on who you talk to, but there's a specific number of recognized macaque species, and then there's a whole handful of them that some people are like, maybe they're a species, but maybe they're a subspecies. But that point doesn't matter. The interesting bit about that is that if you go back to some of the early papers that are categorizing macaque behavior, people will be like, oh man, rhesus macaques, Japanese macaques, long-tailed macaques. They're mean. They are so mean, and for whatever reason, they just will get you. These are the ones that you'll see, TikToks and Facebook videos and stuff like that of tourists who walk onto the, the temple grounds where these macaques live, and they'll take your stuff and they'll bargain with you to get, for peanuts to give you your stuff back. So they're real mean and they're real crafty. And then you've got these macaques that live on these Indonesian islands, Sulawesi macaques. And you've got like Tonkin macaques and black crested macaques, and they are the chillest macaques out there. They sit around all day, grooming each other and playing, and that's all they do, and sleeping. And so then you've got this middle group that's kind of some are despotic, some are more egalitarian, because that's how they structure them. The egalitarian ones who are nice to each other and don't fight that much, and the despotic ones who fight all the time and are mean to people. And then you've got the middle group, which has some that are despotic and some that are egalitarian. And so when phylogenetics came out, because macaques are such a populous monkey, they're very easy to essentially say, all right, let's sequence the genome, and they're a great model organism, so we tend to do it. And when they did that, they found, interestingly enough, all the despotic ones hail from a more recent common ancestor than all of the egalitarian ones. And you can track how they kind of moved in this weird environmental climate across the Indonesian islands and the Malayan Peninsula, as well as Thailand and Southeast Asia in general. And those ones in the middle bridge that gap between the ones that are mean and the ones that are nice. So phylogenetics in behavior is kind of weird, right? It's like the ones that got to these islands, for whatever reason, they were just like, why be mean? Why not just relax on this island? They don't have any natural predators, so they just kind of chill. So it's an interesting little behavioral tidbit about the macaques.
You could almost, not that anyone would really, well, I'll never say never, but someone could almost make a phylogeny of behaviors. For the macaques, you might be able to correspond it to the biological.
Yeah, that's the interesting bit, right? Is that it's like there seems to be this connection with some of the meaner macaques and some of the nicer ones with regards to which they're most closely related to within the genus Macaca. And my one of my professors, actually, he was being really funny the other day. He was like, yeah, we were trying to categorize behavior in the sense of this paper that we were writing. Relative intolerance is what they called it. But basically, it's how mean are the monkeys? Like, there's the phrasing it scientifically, and there's the what is it actually? And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I might have to go soon, but I did have a almost a off-topic question. I wanted to, yeah. But go on.
No. All I was going to say is that he was laughing about it, and he was like, yeah, we were running this phylogenetic analysis, and just for grins, we reached out to some of the folks that we knew were at the field sites, and we were like, okay, if you had to say who's the meanest of the Gwynnon monkeys, who's the meanest one? Oh, definitely the Dianema. Oh, they're real nasty, and asking, okay, who's the nicest? And they just reached out to all these field sites, and he's telling me this, and he's like, you know what? It matched the phylogeny. He's like, you can't report that. They're like, you can't. It's very like anecdotal. He's like, so you can't report it, but it's just very interesting that it seems to match up, right? So that's all I was going to say.
Well, I don't know. Just when you were talking, I said, I've not met anyone that loved primates like you. And I said, the name that came to mind was Jane. Is it Jane Goodall?
Jane Goodall, yeah. And Diane Fossey.
Was she kind of a hero of yours? That's the question I wanted to ask.
Yeah. I love Jane Goodall. What got me interested in primates actually was I took a trip my freshman summer in my undergrad, and I had the utmost pleasure of getting to stay at the field site that she worked at in Gombe Stream National Park, Tanzania. And I got to see the chimps. I got to see the descendants of the grandchildren of the chimps that she watched there. And I got to walk through the forest and follow these chimps around. And, as far as I am from the door that's in the room right now, real close together. So yeah, I love Jane Goodall. I think some of the stuff she's done now is it's a little bit controversial with the behavioral stuff, just because they were provisioning the chimps, and some people are like, yeah, maybe they've got some skewed data on that. But her and Diane Fossey, who's the author of Gorillas in the Mist, and she tragically died on the job while she was out there. She was killed by guerrilla poachers. So it's thought. But yeah, she was so passionate, and I had the absolute honor of meeting one of her old colleagues, a man named Ian Redmond, and he's this real big guy, real gruff, and looks really intimidating. And he came and spoke at my uni this past year, and it's just pouring down rain outside because it's London, right? And he shows up having ridden his bike in London traffic to get there, because he really put his money where his mouth was on green energy. And when he walked in, he knew he's looking real intimidating, and we're all like, "Oh my gosh, this is so scary! Like, what's he gonna say?" He was the biggest teddy bear I've ever met in my life. He had nothing but kind, sweet things to say about how cool Diane Fossey was, and just these stories that he told us. And that was kind of one of the moments for me where I was like, "Wow, I think that's really cool." So,
are you planning to do? I mean, I haven't followed your work very much. Do you plan to do field work? Do you do field work?
Yeah, so I've done some field work. I did some field work in undergrad in Thailand. I was studying civets there, which was really, really cool. And actually, that was another weird thing where I got interested in primates, because I was there when a French primatologist was there studying the northern population of pig-tailed macaques. And I got to go with her while we were looking for the monkeys. And she was like, "Yeah, a lot of people don't believe me, but this is one of the big troops of pig-tailed macaques." I was like, "It can't be that big." And we stumbled across them one of the later days, and they're coming over through the trees, because we're in the middle of the Thai jungle. They're coming over the tops of the trees, and they're crossing the fire lane that they carve out to keep, if fire starts, so the fire doesn't destroy the whole forest. And everyone in my group, we all just kind of hunkered down and we're watching, and they just kept coming and coming, all these monkeys all around. And I remember thinking, okay, maybe she was right. Maybe it is a really big troop. But yeah, to answer the question, I was supposed to do field work instead of the thesis that I'm working on now. I was supposed to go to Malaysia and study the southern population of pig-tailed macaques there. I have my field site manager, everything. I was set to go, and 2 days before I was supposed to leave, Malaysia closed its borders, and the borders are still closed. So I ended up with a desk thesis instead, but it's been cool. I've learned a lot. So.
And you plan to do some in the future, I presume.
I hope, yeah, I hope to. Oh, go ahead.
That's the thing that surprised me, is their temperaments across the entire spectrum of biological researchers. We have the kinds that are the molecular and the math types, and then you have the ones that just really want to do field work. And it's just wonderful to see all the specialties. Actually, when you were going through the 10K trees, I didn't realize that there were that many kinds of primates until you went through that list.
Yeah,
I'm just like, that's an enormous, and not to mention just all the researchers that had to be involved in cataloging all of that. I only thought there are very few. I didn't know that there were that many.
Yeah, it turns out there's just a lot of monkeys out there. And the funny thing is when I was collecting data for the thesis that I'm working on now, I had a really nice thesis for morphologic measurements. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. Like, I'm going to fill this whole data set out. I had upwards of 200 species. And then when I started trying to collect the mean group size and relative behavior and all that kind of stuff, I realized that there were a lot of primates that hadn't really been studied outside of what do they look like, where do they live. And I was trying to figure out, I was like, okay, what's the connection? Why hasn't someone gone and studied some of these primates? And it turns out the overwhelming majority of the ones that have not been studied live in swamps. So it's people don't want to go there.
Oh, I got one last question, and we'll continue conversations elsewhere, maybe on an open mic.
Yeah, I'd love to get a chance to pick your brain more on what you do with the protein structures too.
Yes. I might put it on my channel. It's like, I'm actually trying to segregate parts of my channel, because some of it is just so down in the weeds and really technical. Mm-hmm. And then we have people that are probably wanting more. So Friday is going to be more of a philosophical, theological thing.
Yeah, cool.
And like, for those who haven't heard, I was called upon to debate Jump on Friday on Christianity. But then most of my posts are just purely technical. And so what I got from all of the 10K trees, that's all molecular based.
Yeah.
All right. Now there's another school of thought that's morphology. and
Ah,
I don't know a lot about them. And I heard something called like the Willie Hennig Society. Have you
yeah.
had any contact? I mean, I heard that there's always kind of a little
So
battle between the morphological guys and the molecular guys.
yeah, so I think the molecular, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, but definitely way more skewed towards the molecular side. You can't beat genetics. I mean, you really can't. It's incredible for phylogeny, with regard to constructing accurate trees, because you can say all you want about morphology. I love morphology. I love morphology. I love skulls. I love looking at the skeletal structure and all that kind of stuff, and behavior that is impacted by morphology and all that stuff. But I will be the first one to tell you, no one is going to be able to construct like a phylogenetic tree for all the different kinds of like Himalayan langurs by looking at their bones, or their even their pelage varies so greatly.
Yeah,
It's too subject to environmental factors that can act really quickly in generations. So I'm with you. I'm with the molecular stuff for sure.
well, this is very interesting because as I've followed the discussion, as the sequencing got cheaper and they could do it in just large scale, the literature has changed from being very morphologically oriented and to the more molecular. But I just keep hearing these funny stories about the Willie Hennig Society, and they said, yeah, these are really strange guys, and they did a lot of their stuff based on morphology. And I was just curious because they've kind of gotten to be a legend in terms of what goes on there. And so I was just curious when that 10K trees, I said, did Erica work on any of the morphological things? And I guess that I just don't see that because gene sequencing is so easy now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that's the funny part about that is like the work that I'm doing does involve physical measurements. It does involve how certain aspects of an animal's morphology change with response to certain environmental variables and social variables. But that being said, if you're going to construct like phylogeny, like who comes from who, morphology is not going to get you there. It just won't. It'd be cool if it did, but I mean, again, I'm a big morphology fan, and yeah, that's not gonna inform the kind of phylogeny that you need to get into the weeds with some of this stuff. Certainly, if you're comparing something like I don't know, if you're comparing the carnivorans and you want to look at like a canid versus like a felid, yeah, morphology can help a ton there for the big scale organisms, the differences between orders, even families. They can tell you a lot of stuff. For instance, you don't have to run a molecular analysis to pick up a skull and be like, yes, this comes from a bear, or yes, this comes from a cat, right? Like you can tell the difference even if they're the same size, a lion versus a bear. But yeah, once you get into those really closely related species, it gets really difficult.
Yeah, and what just occurred to me why the morphology will continue, because in paleontology we have a lot of extinct creatures, and that's all we have to be able to try to build.
So I will tell you though, Sal, I will tell you on that one. That's kind of why I specified at the end there, because very rare, because the fossil record is, now I am of the opinion that it's quite good for what we've got, but because it is ultimately very spotty, I think that you tend to not get super closely related species, at least chronologically speaking. The odds don't tend to be that good for us. So when you're comparing things like, I don't know, like how proboscideans have changed through time, they tend to be separated by significant enough amount of strata, right, or geologic separation, that you can be like, okay, it's safe to say that these things lived at a different enough time that they're not like it's not like you're looking at two species of macaque, is what I'm saying. Like they're not identical enough in their morphologic structure that you couldn't tell the difference between whether or not you're looking at members of the same species or not. You could at the very least be like, yes, this comes from one family and this comes from another. I think I'm of that opinion.
Well, this has been a very pleasant discussion. I
had
learned
a blast.
and hopefully, have you done any other videos like this is this your first R video?
this is my first R video for a reason. This is very much testing the waters. But yeah, I heard you say once that on your channel, I think it was on your channel, but you were like, one of the best ways to learn something is to try to teach it. So maybe, I don't know, maybe a
well, this is my first mega video, and I really wanted to do it. So this is a great opportunity, because then people on my channel get to see, okay, Erica and Sal are able to kind of independently construct nested hierarchies.
I love the mega stuff. If you did more mega stuff, I would absolutely be down to watch that. I think that's like, honestly, I think it's certainly a more efficient way of getting a phylogenetic tree for specific genes. Like R is nice for consensus stuff, like I said earlier, but as far as specific genes, I think mega worked great.
Yeah, I think it's a great educational tool, because it didn't even take half a class session, and we were able to start off. Now, we didn't necessarily know all the significance, and even to this day, when the distinction between rooted trees and then the unrooted trees, because you have to pick the right outgroup, we never got to there. And I showed that unrooted tree, and I said that I feel safe saying, okay, here's an unrooted tree. My point isn't to show a phylogenetic, the common ancestor or anything. He said, no, go ahead, try it. I'm just like, okay. So that's something I never really got into. And that's the one part that I never really learned. And but it was good enough just to be able to see, okay, obviously some things are more related than others. And I tried to tell some of my ID and creationist colleagues, I said, okay, they're trying to say, we're not that similar to chimps. I said, well, you're a lot more similar to a chimp than you are to a tree. And I said, you just group things together, you're going to see it looks just like a nested hierarchy. You can't run away from it.
Right. Yeah. I had a ball. I really did. I think this was,
me too.
I think this was
really I'm glad I could finally do something where someone would actually appreciate me giving a mega lecture. I'm just like, no one else. I don't know that anyone on my channel would have been that interested in it.
Listen, I'm telling you, Sal, I put in the description for this video, I was like, listen, this is going to be like a very, very nerdy kind of live stream for sure. Like, you definitely want to be into that stuff, and not everyone is, but man, we held a pretty good audience. I think we
Well, thank you all for everyone who on Erica's channel that joined, and then later on my channel that'll be watching this. So
go subscribe to Sal 100%. His links are in the description. So and get some more mega videos for sure.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Oh, and to you too, Sal. I'll end the broadcast here. Thanks.